Welcome back to Black Swan Outdoors, and today we're going to continue our notebook series by talking about range cards. But before we get into the actual notebook, let's talk a little bit about range cards. Range cards come in different varieties. They can come in big, small, different things that you can print off. They originate from the military. It's a military tool used to be able to establish a range from a firing position with various different types of weapons. And it basically is what I would like to, how I describe it as a communication device. And here at Black Swan Outdoors, we talk a lot about tools and communications and the importance of this. And I think a range card is a great representation of a communication tool that can be used for many different things effectively, whether you're looking at potentially home defense, whether you're looking at hunting, or you're learning how to increase your observation skills. So it's not necessarily a tool that necessarily is associated with weapons, although that's where it kind of came from in combat. So essentially, as I understand it, I have never served, so I can't say that I've made range cards myself or have been taught the military way. So for those that are veterans and active duty that might be watching this video, please correct me if I mislead anybody or say anything incorrect, or if I miss something important, please feel free to add that in the comments for clarity. With that all said, I think there's a lot of military tactics that are fantastic that can be used in a civilian context. However, oftentimes those things often do need to be translated or adapted for civilian use. And I think the range card is no different from that. So there are things that I think that work really well and are part of the SOPs and kind of the doctrine way of doing things in the military for very specific reasons. However, when we're looking at it from a civilian perspective instead of a military perspective, we can do away with some of that doctrine and techniques and procedures that are important in that military context. So with that being said, let's talk a little bit about the range card in context of what we're trying to do here. So what we did a blog post about this, so if you're interested in reading a little bit more about range cards, you can check that out on our Patreon. And then this kind of a story or the vignette that we used in the post was about a escape and evacuation situation, because there's kind of a theme that we're running on for the last few weeks here. And in that situation, your convoy is leaving a city, heading for safety. On the way to safety, they're on an evacuation route. They're stopping at a safe house for the night. That's part of the plan. And what we would do is, or what we'd suggest is you go ahead and advance at some point to making sure that that safe house is stocked with blankets, whatever you needed, but then also to do a kind of a security check of that place. And one of those things that you can do, amongst many other things, is establishing range cards from firing positions so that you can defend that particular safe house. Now, that's certainly fictitious. It's a fantasy story, but it's something that helps kind of illustrate how, this could be used in context. From the civilian perspective, there's a couple other ways I think that would be fairly interesting. One, of course, would be to help increase your observation skills. And one of the tools that we like and we promote here at Black Swan Outdoors for many, many reasons is the Winston Telemeter. And this is something that you can travel with. You can go anywhere with, you can kill time with in practice. It's a great tool. It's a great opportunity thing for teaching kids math, particularly trigonometry. It's just a great all-around handy tool that you can have. Of course, there's other range-finding devices, but none that can work like the Winston Telemeter for navigation, for celestial navigation and land navigation. As well as many, many, many other things. And some of those skills we'll talk about how you could use these with that later. So if you were out and about and you wanted to kind of increase your observation skills for whatever reason, you wanted to go around and measure distances and building heights and things like that, you could use a range card as a means to help you increase your observation skills. That's kind of a neat thing. So you don't necessarily have to be a gun enthusiast to like or to need or want to use a range card. Certainly, that's another great use for range cards. If for those that are going out to range and shooting, they might consider, doing a range card, putting up a range card. In fact, there's different versions of range cards out there. There's one for like precision shooting or sniping that has dope tables and other pieces of information that one could use inside there for shooting. So we have recreation, we have observation. The other thing too is then hunting. I think range cards make for an excellent way to communicate to other hunters about positions that you might find as a record from year to year of where you're going to set up a deer stand, how that deer stand's set up, the different ranges. If you're shooting multiple weapons from a particular deer stand, for example, you might be shooting a bow or a rifle from the same position. You could set up a range card for both of those. And essentially what it means is you have the ability to kind of get on target faster and more efficiently when you have a well thought out plan. And if you're working, as I said, with a hunting party or multi-generations over the course of a year, you have a written document that then you can hang on to or you can pass on. So there's plenty of other things we're going to talk about later that you can use in a hunting context as well with the range card. And then I would say the last thing which I would caution, but I will bring it up because we kind of talked about it in that kind of fictitious vignette, was using a range card for a home defense situation. I personally would caution on that. It's my personal opinion that when you're starting using precision weapons or long shooting over long distances, as a range card helps prepare you for, it becomes harder in a court of law to be able to justify that what you were doing was actually self-defense and wasn't an offensive behavior. So there's many YouTube videos I've seen out there and blogs and different things where people promote the use of range cards and prepper, communities and militias and all that stuff. And I think once you get into kind of that territory, you need to be very, very careful, particularly for those legal and ethical reasons that I just spoke about. Okay, so with all that aside, let's talk about how you would want to set up your range card. The first thing I would say is, of course, you need a card, and you can do, what we're going to use in this example is this full-size sheet, which you could certainly use if you wanted to. I find it kind of more helpful to do something on a little smaller. This is, I think, 4x6. You can make even smaller range cards. This one's folded over. This one is folded over so it can slide into a notebook. And then lastly, you could use actually the notebook yourself. And so what I do is I separate the range card in, it has 3 sections, and I separate the first 2 sections, that semicircle section here on the first page, and then the data section here on the second page. That way I have a little bit more room to be able to draw and get more details in here. Now to set this up, the range card up in your notebook, very simple to do if you have a Winston telemeter. The quadrantelemeter is rounded, has a rounded edge, and so what I can do is I can use this rounded edge to making my semicircles or arches right here on my book. And so obviously these are pre-made in the book so you can see what that would look like. And so if you had a Winston telemeter and a notebook, you could quickly make a range card. The reason why I bring this up is, although having a standardized range card is better, in my opinion, for your own records and for communication, you might not think that you would need a range card, or maybe you need more range cards in the situation. And in that case, if you have the capacity to make one, then I think it's a great skill set to have. Particularly if it's not something that you think you're going to need and you fall into. And that's kind of the point of a lot of these skills and the things we talk about, is sometimes we don't think that we're going to need particular things, but if we have the means to make them, hey, that's great. Very similar to, we did a video on our navigation series about how to make a grid overlays and how to find your UTM or long latitude coordinates with a scratch piece of paper, and find your precise location. So it kind of falls into that same kind of category. So we've talked a little bit about all the different contexts that you would need, and of course that was going to determine the next part that we're going to talk about, which is the tools that you would want to have. Certainly not all these tools that we're going to talk about in a moment are going to apply to everybody, but these are some things that I think might be particularly helpful for people who might be thinking about using a range card. Aside from the Winson telemeter, and by the way, there are different versions of the telemeter. There are kind of the more card versions, smaller pocket-sized versions that are available, that one can use as well. It doesn't have to be a rounded version. I'm just using this as the example because it can make the semicircles. It also can do a lot more than just kind of your standard range card. While I'm talking about range cards and I'm thinking about it, I'll just kind of, one of the things that you can get different types of range cards that help you range distances in an analog fashion. And for those that are interested in more in-depth in that topic, I have a blog post on that as well, which I think pretty covers that topic very, very well. Is that many range cards that are out there only do one thing, which is range find, and they don't do it very well, and they're not terribly accurate, to be completely honest. The thing about the Winson telemeter is that it does the range finding very well, very accurately, much more accurate than some of those others out there. However, it also does things like helps you in celestial navigation. It helps you in land navigation. It has many, many different applications, particularly those that going into trigonometry that you wouldn't be able to do with your standard range cards. Specifically, especially if you're going to go into long distance shooting and you're using a range card, a standard ranging device, plastic cards that are out there, don't do the same things that the Winson telemeter does. And doesn't provide all of the tools that it does, that a Winson telemeter can. So I don't get any money from Winson. I don't get anything. I am just a huge fan of them, and I think that it's a great tool, great multi-tool for many, many different uses. The other thing you could consider is this MOA Mills converter range card. This particular one, it might be kind of hard to see. It's black and white, it's clear. I'll just put it on the black and white Winson. Maybe, I don't know if you can see that really better. But this one is clear so that you can put a glow chem stick or glow stick inside this little notch here, and then you can glow. And I have shown this before in other videos. But this card here works really well when you're using a second device, which is some kind of optics. Now, you don't need to have an optics with a reticle like this one. This is a monocular from Vertex. This is the Solo RT. It's an 8x36 optic that has a reticle inside there that I can use then for range finding. Very lightweight, very quick, very easy to use. And it's my preferred ranging method. However, if you wanted binoculars or spotting scope, or depending on what you're doing, of course, you can do that. You don't necessarily even need to have this as well. The second thing I would say that you would probably need would be a compass. Compasses is part of the first step, which is orienting your range card to north. And also for taking azimuths on different components of the range card. So this is a very important part of the process. And in that case, I would recommend, depending on your situation, of course, a very accurate compass. I do believe the Lenset compasses are fairly accurate. I enjoy using mine. One of the advantages of this using the Lensatic compass, of course, is not only range finding, but using it to measure widths and other types of measurements as well. So these are big, these are bulky, these are also fairly expensive, so it might not be something that everybody wants. Plus, it's more kind of in that military end, and so if you're trained on a Lensatic compass, that might be the compass you feel more comfortable with. For everybody else that's not in the military, a simple base plate compass will do as well. These are lighter, they're not as robust, but they can be fairly accurate. I would look for one that has a rotating bezel, 2-degree increment, and a flat edge if you can. You can certainly get a sighting compass, not necessary, but you know, these are cheaper, these are lighter, so there's some advantages to the base plate compass over the Lensatic, and oftentimes they're more accessible. So certainly a compass is helpful. Then lastly, I would say is a GPS device, handheld GPS. This would become more of an option. Not everyone would find use for this, but if you wanted to mark your exact location and then put that in your range card, you can certainly do that. If your maps have grids of some kind of grid coordinates, you can do that. You can do it analog style with a grid overlay. You could put in your own grid system in your maps, as we talked about in the previous video. You know, so you don't necessarily have to have a GPS. It's just quicker, faster, more accurate. So that's something to consider too. This particular GPS has been with me for years, and I'm definitely up for an upgrade at some point. But all it does really is give me coordinates and recording and holding on coordinates. So the point is that you don't need to have anything super fancy, super flash to do that. And then, of course, your writing utensils. Now, if you are going to print out your own range cards, you can laminate them, as I did here. Oops. And if you laminate it, you can use, if you just laminate, you can use the lamination with dry erase pen, and that's going to work fine. However, which works okay for training purposes, works great for practice, but it's not going to obviously stay on the sheet. You can certainly just use regular paper if you wanted to. Just have to be careful the paper's not going to rip and get wet, etc., etc. And it's a one-time use, of course, of paper. So if you're practicing, I would recommend laminating them, just so you have the ability to continue to practice. You could use wax pencils. You could use other things as well. Now, if you're going to take these out into the field, you can laminate it and with contact paper, as we talked about in the previous videos. We've showed you with some cards and note cards that I carry. So that way you can write on the clear contact paper with a pencil and then erase it. Alternatively, is you could just also laminate it with a regular laminator. And then you just use Scotch-Brite, kind of the green scrubby pads that you have in your kitchen. Scuff up the laminated card, and then with just a regular pencil, you can write on it, and then you can erase it. And so it's a little bit better, I think, in the field. Another alternative is you can just buy range cards, and right in the range, all makes range cards that you can purchase. That is good, strong, sturdy paper that's not going to dissolve in the water, that you can literally write in the rain with. So those are just some options. Okay, now we got all that kind of clear up. Let's talk a little bit about the range card and kind of get into the kind of more specifics on that. Again, there's different processes out there, different protocols and SOPs on how to use a range card, when to use a range card. I've read anything from, you have groups of people that might, or infantrymen that might say if they're in a position for longer than 20 minutes, they're going to start making a range card, or 30 minutes, or whatever it is. Certainly in a civilian situation, you're going to make a range card whenever you want to, whenever you feel the need to do that. So let's say you are hunting, you decide you want to fill out your range card, as our example. How would you start off? Well, what I would say is the very first thing is you're going to want to orient your range card as you would with like a map to north. Now, as I said earlier, there's 3 sections to the range card. There's kind of your administrative section up here. You have your sketching section or drawing section here, and then you have your data section down here. All right. So in the administrative section is where it says magnetic north. And so what we're just going to do is going to go ahead and put in the direction of magnetic north right at the very top. Certainly you could put in, if you had a squad, platoon, and company information, you could certainly do that. Obviously, if you're civilian, there's no need to do that. You could just put in your name, whatever, or location if you wanted, whatever you wanted to put in there. It doesn't matter. Next up, what we're going to do is, now that we have kind of we've determined our magnetic north, we've oriented ourselves, the very first thing we're going to want to do is put in the sectors of fire. Sectors of fire in a military context is going to be the left and right limits, essentially, of the weapon that you're using, or the field of view that you have, or the sector that has been determined for you that you're going to be firing in. So that is going to have a left limit and a right limit, and it's going to look like a V shape here. So you'll just shoot an azimuth and put that azimuth here. You can put left or right, and you could even put it down here, or you should put it down in the data, left, right, all right, and then your elevation, 500 meters, I don't know, whatever. We're just doing this direction, 120 and 130 degrees. These are just made up numbers. I'm just doing this for illustrative purposes. Okay, next here is this is important because we talked about this as a communication device earlier. Your sectors of fire and everything, the picture that you're going to be drawing in here, all this information goes up the chain of command, and each chain of command is going to make a sketch or drawing essentially based off of this, which then they'll be able to evaluate. Leadership would be able to evaluate for specific coverage that is needed or changing, the safety and well-being of troops, and so on and so forth. And so each one of these range cards is going to be is part of a bigger picture, essentially, to what's going on in that defensive position. For a hunter, let's say, your sectors of fire could be just, what is safe for you or capable for you in terms of firing from the position that you're at, is that you don't have to think about it in context of other people. This is just your ability, your sectors that you've decided that you want to shoot from. Okay, next thing here is what we're going to want to do is we're going to look for target reference points. Now, target reference points are the things that are out in your field. Sometimes a target reference point or a reference point in general could also become part of your sectors. So let's say, maybe there's a church or a building on one side, or there's a boulder on the next side here on the other side. That could determine your sector as well. But what we're talking about here for our target reference points are something that's out in the field here that is going to give the person who's taking that position behind you, or you're lining yourselves up with, some kind of reference point to what they're looking at. So they've oriented their card, they've established their sectors with a compass, hopefully. Now they're just going to visually look out, and they're going to try to find 1 to maybe 3 things. If you have more than 3 things, it's going to perhaps get a little more cluttered, and it might not be as beneficial. One thing, at least one prominent thing you're going to want to have out there. Now, if you're out in the woods and you really don't have anything, there might not be a need for a range card if you're going to be in a dense forest or jungle situation, but if you're in an open field, or if you're looking down onto something, this is going to be something that's going to make a lot more sense for you as well. So you could have, maybe a big prominent boulder as one, maybe there's a river going through here, and a road, and a bridge going across that river. Sorry, it's a bad bridge. Could be another reference point. It could be a tree line. It could be a mountain. Let's say if there's, a mountainous area here, you could put in contour lines on here so that the person knows, oh, that's a hill or a mountain or whatever. And then you're going to range each one of these components. So you could call this Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie. And then so Alpha, Bravo, Charlie in our data. That's going to be, 80, I'll just put 80, 90, and 70, whatever, it doesn't matter. These are your degrees. Keep it 500 meters, everything's level. I don't know, for our elevation, that may or may not matter for a lot of people. If you're shooting from a higher position, say a deer stand, that is something that is going to make a difference because your range is going to be off if you are ranging with your range device and not calculating in your angular height. And that is where your Winson telemeter comes in, so you can measure your slope for your to get your firing solutions. If you're ever shooting upwards or downwards, and again, this is why that range card helps you kind of stop and think about your environment and how you're going to take your best shots. And then lastly here, we'll just go back to A is a bridge, B is the rocks, and C, we'll call it the mountain. I don't know. All right. Rock pile. All right. Now that we have kind of a reference points here, we have the ability then to use these reference points for our ranges. We know what our ranges are, and now we could, if we're shooting long distance, we could use that for our holdovers. If we're shooting with a bow, we might know that maybe, this rock pile is at 40 meters, and maybe something else even closer could be at 10 meters, whatever it is, it doesn't matter, is that so very quickly without having to range that animal when it comes into sight, what that range is. You're going to be able to kind of better, quicker guess that estimate as well. And you're also going to have a bigger picture, better picture of what's in your environment by doing this. You're spending time watching and observing this. So again, you're kind of building those observation skills. Next here is our maximum engagement line. Okay, so that could be, let's say you don't feel comfortable taking a shot over 40 meters or, 60 meters, whatever. Then you're going to establish that maximum engagement line. And so you can basically you can note that MEL on one of these lines. Now you can use that then as the limit for the last line if you wanted, MEL. And then what you could do is you could determine your circles, what they equal, these semicircles. Each consecutive circle is going to, or that circle is going to equal a particular distance. You just take the number of circles and divide that by the range of the weapon that or the range that you feel comfortable in shooting, or the range of that weapon. So you would just say, okay, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 rings. You divide whatever that distance is, that your MEL or your maximum engagement line is, and you've got that. Alternatively, with these rings, you could just establish, well, okay, this is 10. This is, each ring represents 10 meters, 10 feet if you want, whatever, 100 meters, 50 meters, whatever it is. It doesn't matter. Whatever you feel comfortable with, that's fine too. All right. So now that we know our maximum distance that we're going to be shooting, we have different terrain features in our sectors that are going to help us identify our location as well as our specific ranges. The last thing that we want to consider here is kind of what we call dead zones. Dead zones are things that we can't see. So we can note those dead zones, like say behind this rock pile, by just kind of an area line here and then hash marks. And that's basically going to tell us that we can't see in here, but maybe if we're shooting with another party, they might be able to see it from another angle. So they'll be able to see that dead zone. If we're worried about enemy combatants coming in, these are different spots that we're going to be concerned with, because that's where someone could hide. From a hunting perspective, this is something very different, because a deer could be bedded down back here, right? Or more importantly, a hunting party could be moving through, right? This might not be just a trail. This could be a deer trail. And in that case, we would be anticipating, the reason why we're setting up our stand at this location is because we're anticipating a deer moving down through this, this path, very similar to an enemy forces, for example. Now, from a hunting perspective, we want to be concerned of not shooting people, right? So this might be an area that we would want to be concerned with from the perspective of other hunters in our area, that we might not want to shoot in this general direction because we don't have coverage in this area. Now, I know a lot of times people go out in the environment, they think that they can make rash decisions, but sometimes when that adrenaline is pumping and we pick up the gun and we want to react, that's where a lot of near misses and close calls and accidental shootings happen, when people just hear that rustling, they get excited, and they shoot. And again, this whole process of the range card, in my opinion, helps kind of slow us down in thinking about and putting a plan together to increase what is our situational awareness about a situation. Is also increasing the aid and safety of other people in our area in this regard. So I think I really like this use of the range card for those reasons, particularly in the hunting context. The last thing that we want to talk about here is then our weapon. Now, you could use different symbols. The military is going to use different symbols if it's a javelin system or a machine gun or whatever. Obviously, that might not be something necessary for us. We do have a weapons section in our data. So if we're just using bow, we could just put in bow on here. The other section here in our data is our position identification. You could use, as I talked about, your grid reference, or you could put in your lat and longitude, or your UTM coordinates in there. Date, military is going to use the date time. Depending on how you're using this card for hunting, you might want to put in your date and time. However, date is probably just sufficient enough so that you know that in 2002 hunting season, this is what you used. If you want to get more specific, August, whatever, you could put that in again, And then at the very bottom of your data section here, we have remarks. So you could put in specific information that would be good for you next year to remember, or if you're handing that card off to somebody else, right? Maybe you're hunting with with a nephew or a son or somebody. You could hand this card off and then have a remark about the area that they might want to be concerned with. As I said, that there's many different aspects of this. If you wanted to get into that long distance shooting, you might want to upgrade your card to kind of that's going to have more of the data on previous engagement information on there, or dope information. But it's really kind of what I think is just a really great communication tool. One of the things we talk about in our book, Guerrilla Radio, is how do you use your radios to effectively communicate. And it's not just the technical aspect of radios, but it's actually how do you actually use the radio, how do you actually speak in the radio, and how do you communicate with other people, and how do you practice communication. And I think a great example of that is that spotter shooter communication that goes back and forth between the two. And that this range card sets them up in a sense for that communication, for that dialogue. Because what we want to do, especially when we're speaking on radios, is we want kind of clear and concise we don't want to sit there and give the other person a whole narrative of what's going on. We want to give them the right information that they need so that they can make the right decisions of what they need to do. And so if you're hunting, if you're observing, if you're using radios, this then in a sense can become a script for you. So, your spotter or your partner could be saying, and you can do this while hunting. There's no reason why you wouldn't need to have a spotter. Your spotter could say, possible deer, possible target, 300 meters, left of TRP alpha, buck deer, whatever. And your shooter would say, okay, roger that, got you. Just like what we're talking about in radio communication speak, it's very, very similar. Target heading on road, hold, 1.5 mils low. So they're giving them that instruction, based on the homework that you've done in the card. They're not making that up on the fly, Then shooter is going to acknowledge, okay, yeah, roger, holding 1.5 low. All right, and then spotter up, shooter up, fire. And then the spotter can follow up with that, hey, target down, good shot, whatever. So again, it's that whole process of that dialogue, that clear and concise information, just like what we talked about in our book with reports and why it's important to write out reports when you're sending, with radio and tactical radio use, is that it helps you focus on the information that's important at the moment, not the narrative. And the range card does the same thing. It's kind of in that same vein. So that's range cards. Hopefully, you guys found that interesting. We offer, you can find these range cards online anywhere. We do offer them on our Resistance library that you can download both versions, the standard version, and then I guess what they call the sniper range card version. When I printed this off, I print this off as a image so that I could reduce it down to a 4x6 card. So that's how I did this, just printing that off by 4x6 image versus a PDF. And then this, I can't remember the size of this. Maybe this is a 4x6 too. Yeah, this must be a 4x6 as well. And I just folded that over to make it a little bit smaller. But as I said before, really, you don't necessarily need to have any of these tools. If you have just a simple compass and a pencil and a notebook, you're in business. You can range find by estimation if you need to. You can use a Winson telemeter. They're only $30. You don't need to have the fancy gadgets and stuff. You can just make do with what you've got. And so having the right tools and the right knowledge really helps you out in the field when you're in a jam. And how you want to apply these skills is really up to you, whether it be for just recreation, for hunting, for shooting, long distance shooting, for defensive purposes. That's really up to you. Hopefully I covered everything in the range cards. Certainly let me know if I didn't, because obviously this is not my area of expertise, to be perfectly honest. But in terms of how I think it's an interesting thing and how you can incorporate that into why I think this is an interesting thing and how you can incorporate it into what you do, I think is important. So with that, thank you for watching, and stay tuned for the next video. Like and subscribe.